The xenobiology lab was the strangest room on the entire university station. Tanks filled with glowing, floating creatures lined one wall. On another, holograms of skeletons from a dozen different planets spun slowly. The air smelled like ozone and something faintly sweet. Students from many species filled the room. There were tall, slender beings with gray skin and large eyes. There were others covered in fine fur who chittered softly. And then there were the Cathar. The Cathar were a warrior species. They were big. The smallest of them was twice as wide as a human and a head taller. They had thick, hard plates covering their bodies like natural armor. Each one had 4 strong arms. They moved with a confidence that said they owned any space they were in. Their leader was a student named Kale. He was the biggest of them all, and his deep voice rumbled when he spoke. Sitting at a small desk near the back were 2 humans. One was a young man named Minsu. He had a friendly face and was always looking around, interested in everything. Next to him was a young woman named Gi. She was small and quiet. While Minsu watched the other aliens, Gi kept her eyes on her personal screen, her dark hair falling like a curtain, partly hiding her face. She was reading ahead in the lesson. Their teacher was Professor Valerius. He looked like a tall, graceful bird. He had feathers around his head and long, thin fingers that he used to gesture at the holograms. Today, we continue our study of predatory adaptations, Professor Valerius said, his voice a pleasant chirp. The main hologram changed to show a powerful 6-legged creature with massive claws. The Galrock beast of Sigma Prime, for example, has a bite force that can crush starship hull plating. An excellent example of pure power. A few students made impressed sounds. Kale and his friends just nodded, as if this was a simple and obvious fact. The hologram changed again. This time it showed a Cathar, its forearms raised in a fighting pose. Now observe the Cathar species, the professor continued. Their primary adaptation is not just strength, but specialized strength. The striking force of their upper arms can shatter ferroconcrete. Their lower arms are capable of precise grappling and holding. This makes them perfectly evolved combatants. Kale smiled, a proud and sharp-looking smile. He looked over at the humans. His eyes moved from Minsu to Ga. He saw how small she was, how she seemed to be trying to disappear into her work. A low chuckle came from his throat. Professor, Kale's voice cut through the lecture. The room got quieter. I have a question. Yes, student Kale? Professor Valerius said. Why do we spend time on the weak? Kale asked. He gestured with one of his lower hands toward the humans. We study powerful predators. We study clever prey. But why study them? The humans. They have no claws. Their skin is soft. They have only 2 weak arms. They are slow. They break easily. What is there to learn? Minsu's face tightened. He didn't like being talked about like he was an animal in a zoo. He opened his mouth to speak, but the professor answered first. Every species has its place in the galaxy, student Kyle. Humanity's path is one of ingenuity and cooperation. Cooperation is what prey does when they are scared, Kale said, his voice dripping with disdain. He took a few steps toward the human's desk. The other students watched, some nervous, some amused. They huddled together for safety. It is not a strength. It is a confession of weakness. Minsu could not stay quiet any longer. He stood up, his chair scraping back. We have more than that. We have intelligence. We have spirit. We don't give up. That's how we got here. Kale looked down at Minsu, his smile not fading. Spirit, persistence? He let out that grinding laugh again. These are not weapons. These are the things that help prey run away for a little bit longer. They do not help you win. They only help you not lose. Yet. He then turned his full attention to Ga. She had not moved. She still stared at her screen, but she was no longer reading. Her whole body was very, very still. Look at this one, Kale said, pointing a thick finger at her. She does not even have the spirit your friend talks about. She hides. She is silent. Is it true what they say? That humans freeze when they are faced with a real predator. Is that your great adaptation? Paralysis? Ga's hands were on the desk. Minsu, from the corner of his eye, saw that her knuckles were white. She was gripping the edge of the desk so hard her fingers were bloodless. A very slight tremor like a tiny earthquake started in her hands. Leave her alone, Kale, Minsu said, his voice firm. He stepped in front of Ga, putting himself between her and the huge alien. Kale's eyes glinted. This was what he wanted. A reaction. A challenge, or what? You will not give up on me. He laughed. You are in my way, little human. With a casual, effortless motion as if he were swatting a fly, Kale swung one of his large upper arms. It was a backhand, not meant to cause serious injury but to humiliate, to show how little of a threat Min-Soo was. The impact was loud. It wasn't a punch, but the flat of Kale's hard hand hitting Min-Soo's chest. The force lifted Min-Soo off his feet. He flew backwards, crashing into a trolley of glass beakers and chemical samples. Glass shattered. Liquids of different colors spilled everywhere. Min-Soo landed hard on the floor amidst the broken glass and liquid, gasping for air. He clutched his chest, pain written all over his face. He was hurt, but he was conscious. A collective gasp went through the room. Professor Valerius squawked in alarm. Student Kale. That is unacceptable. But Kale wasn't listening to the professor. He was watching GA. Everyone was watching GA. She had finally moved. She slowly, very slowly lifted her head. Her eyes were no longer on her screen. They were on Min-Soo lying in a heap on the floor. She saw him struggling to breathe. She saw the pain in his eyes. Then her gaze shifted. It moved from Min-Soo to Kale. It settled on the hand that had just struck her friend. Her face showed no fear. It showed no anger. It was a blank, empty mask. But her eyes were different. They were dark and deep and focused with an intensity that seemed to suck the sound from the room. They were not the eyes of a scared student. They were the eyes of something else entirely. Kale saw her look, and for a flicker of a second his confidence wavered. This was not the reaction he expected. This was not fear, this was assessment. He covered his unease with more arrogance. Ah, he rumbled, a nasty smile spreading across his face. The little creature finally shows some life, you see? It only took the defeat of her protector to make her look up. GA stood up. Her movement was not fast. It was not slow. It was smooth. It was precise. There was no wasted motion. She pushed her chair back without making a sound. The quiet, nervous energy that usually surrounded her was gone, replaced by a cold, still calm. The air around her felt heavy and cold. Kyle misinterpreted her completely. He saw her standing up as a challenge. A foolish final act of defiance, so you want to play? He chuckled. He decided he would end this with one final crushing display. He would put this human in her place once and for all. He would show the entire class what happens when weakness stands up to strength. He drew back one of his powerful upper arms, his fist clenched tight. This was not a slap. This was a real blow aimed right at her head. It was meant to knock her out, to send her crashing to the floor like her friend. He threw the first blow in class, and the world for GI narrowed to a single, silent point. The world slowed down. The sound of Min-Soo's pained breathing, the nervous shuffling of the other students, the sharp chirp of Professor Valerius, it all faded into a dull hum in GA's ears. Her mind, usually a busy place of thoughts and worries, went perfectly quiet and clear. It was like a library after everyone had gone home. Kale's fist came towards her face. It was huge, like a rock. It moved through the air with terrible force. She could see the hard plates on his knuckles. She could see the way the air moved around his arm. To everyone else, it was a lightning-fast punch. To GA, it was a slow, obvious path. She did not jump back. She did not flinch. Her body moved without her having to think about it. It was a movement she had never practiced, but her bones and muscles knew it perfectly. It was an old knowledge passed down through thousands of generations, waking up from a long, long sleep. Her head tilted to the side. It was a small movement, just a few inches. Kyle's fist missed her face by the width of a finger. The wind from the blow stirred her hair. The force of his punch carried him forward just a little off balance. In that same moment, as his arm was extended past her, GA's left hand moved. It was not a fist. She held her fingers straight and tight, her thumb pressed down. Her hand became a blade. It was not a magical weapon. It was just a human hand, but it was aimed with a precision that was not taught in any school. Her hand, the side of it, snapped forward and up. It did not strike his armored chest or his thick arm. It struck a very specific spot on the inside of his wrist, where the hard plates met and a cluster of nerves lay close to the surface. There was a sound, a wet, sharp crack. It was not a loud sound, but in the quiet room everyone heard it. Kale's roar was not one of anger anymore. It was a mix of surprise, confusion, and sudden sharp pain. He jerked his arm back. His hand, the one he had just punched with, hung limp. He could not make a fist. He stared at it, his brain trying to understand what had just happened. The little human had not run. She had not cried. She had broken his wrist with the edge of her hand. The spell of shock in the room broke. Professor Valerius cried out, "Cease this immediately." But it was too late for that. The fight was not over. For GA, it had only just begun. The thing inside her, the quiet calculator that had just found its first target, was now fully awake. It saw a large, dangerous threat. Its only job was to make the threat not a threat anymore. Kyle's confusion turned into pure, hot rage. The pain in his wrist was an insult. He had been hurt by something he considered nothing. He forgot about the professor. He forgot about the other students. All he saw was the small, calm girl standing in front of him. "You insect," he bellowed. He lunged at her, his 3 good arms reaching out to grab her, to crush her. GA did not wait for him. She moved forward, not away. She ducked under his grasping arms. She was so much smaller and lower to the ground than him. To her, his big body was full of empty spaces. She moved into one of those spaces right next to him. His charge was powerful but clumsy. He expected her to try to escape. He did not expect her to come closer. As she passed by his side, her right knee came up. It did not aim for his stomach, which was protected by thick plates. It drove straight into the side of his forward knee joint. It was a complex joint built to carry his great weight, but like any joint, it had a weakness. There was another sickening pop. Kyle grunted, a sound of air forced from his lungs. His leg buckled underneath him. He stumbled, his balance gone. The rage on his face was now mixed with a flicker of something new. Fear. He was starting to understand that this was not a fight. This was something else. He tried to turn to face her, but she was already behind him. Her movements were a continuous flow. There was no pause, no hesitation. Every motion led directly to the next. As he turned, his back was to her for just a second. GI's elbow, the hard point of it, snapped backward. It struck him in the lower part of his back, right where his natural armor was thinnest, protecting a bundle of nerves that controlled his legs. A shockwave of numbness shot down his good leg. He cried out, a strangled sound. He was falling now, his body not obeying him. He was a giant warrior, and this small human was dismantling him piece by piece, finding every little weakness he never knew he had. He crashed to the floor on his side. The impact was heavy enough to shake the room. He tried to push himself up with his 3 working arms, his one good leg scrambling for purchase. The purple blood from his broken wrist was smearing on the clean floor. His breath came in ragged gasps. The look in his eyes was wild, unfocused. He was beaten, but the thing inside GA was not done. It did not understand surrender. It only understood that a threat was still moving. A threat was still looking at her. Kale, driven by panic and instinct, made one last effort. He rolled onto his back and tried to kick out at her with his one good leg. It was a desperate, slow movement. GA saw it coming. She stepped on his kicking leg, her weight pinning it down for a moment. Then, using that as a step, she launched herself forward. Her other foot came up in a short, powerful arc. There was a final, solid thud. Her heel connected with the side of his head, right at the temple. Kale's head snapped to the side. His body went completely limp. The fight went out of him all at once. He was unconscious. Silence. The only movement was GA, landing softly back on her feet. The only sound was her breathing, which was even and calm, as if she had just taken a short walk. She stood over the massive, fallen alien. He lay in a growing pool of his own purple blood. She looked down at him, her face still that same empty mask. There was no triumph there, no satisfaction. There was nothing. Then she slowly looked down at her own hands. She turned them over, looking at her palms, then the backs. They were clean. There was no blood on them. She had finished the fight without getting a single drop on herself. She finished it with blood on the floor, but it was all his. The silence in the room was thick and heavy. No one moved. No one spoke. The other students were frozen in their seats, their mouths open. They had just watched a Cathar warrior, one of the most feared species in the galaxy, be taken apart in less than 15 seconds by a human girl half his size. It was not a brawl. It was a demonstration, a brutal, terrifying lesson. Professor Valerius was staring, his feathered head crest standing fully erect in his shock. He had never seen such efficient, cold violence. Minsu pushed himself up on one elbow from his spot on the floor amidst the broken glass. He looked from the unconscious Kale to G.A. He was not surprised that she had won. He was afraid of how she had won. He had seen that look in her eyes only once before, a long time ago, and he had hoped to never see it again. G.A.'s eyes finally lost their dark, flat focus. She blinked. She looked around the room, seeing the stunned faces of her classmates as if for the first time. She saw Minsu on the floor, still in pain. Without a word, without even looking at the professor, she walked over to her friend. She knelt beside him, ignoring the broken glass. Her movements were gentle now. The predator was gone, put back to sleep. "Can you stand?" she asked, her voice soft. It was the first time she had spoken since the fight began. Minsu nodded, wincing. "I think so." She helped him to his feet, supporting his weight. He leaned on her, and she was strong enough to hold him. Together, they started to walk towards the door. As they passed the professor, Professor Valerius finally found his voice. It was a shaky, weak sound. "Student G.A." What was that?" G.A. stopped. She did not turn to look at him. She kept her eyes forward on the door. "That," she said quietly, "was the lesson you should have been teaching." Then she and Minsu walked out of the lab, leaving behind a room full of terrified aliens and the bloody proof that humanity was not what they thought. The walk back to the human sector of the station was silent. Minsu leaned on G.A., his breath still coming in short, pained gasps. Every step sent a jolt through his chest. G.A. moved with a steady strength, her arm around him, supporting most of his weight. She said nothing. Her face was back to being a closed door. Students from other species saw them in the hallway. They saw the human boy, clearly hurt, being helped by the small, quiet girl. At first they looked with mild curiosity. Then whispers started. The news was traveling faster than they could walk. The story of what happened in the xenobiology lab was spreading through the station like a virus. By the time they reached the door to Minsu's small living quarters, the looks they were getting were different. They were looks of fear, of confusion, of awe. G.A. helped Minsu onto his bed. She went to his small kitchen area and got a glass of water. Her hands were perfectly steady. She handed him the glass. "Thank you," Minsu said, his voice rough. He took a slow drink. He watched her as she stood there, not looking at anything in particular.
"G.A.," he began softly.
Are you back?" She finally looked at him. There was a faint confusion in her eyes, as if she was trying to remember something. "I never left," she said, but her voice was distant. "You know what I mean," he said. The other thing. The switch. Is it off?" G.A. looked down at her hands again. She flexed her fingers slowly. "It's going back to sleep," she whispered. "It's always there, but it's going back to sleep now." Minsu nodded slowly. He had known G.A. since they were children on Earth. He knew about her family. He knew about the switch. Her grandfather had called it that. It was a thing from the old days, from a time when humans were not the peaceful explorers they were now. It was a deep old part of the brain that knew how to do one thing very well: break other living things. Most people had forgotten it was there, but in some families it was stronger. In G.A.'s family it was very strong. "You broke his wrist with your hand," Minsu said, almost to himself. "I saw it." "It was the right place to hit," G.A. said, her tone flat like she was reciting a fact from a book. "The nerve cluster. The bone is thinner there. How did you know that?" "I didn't," she said, looking at him. Her eyes were clear now and filled with a deep tiredness. "I just looked at him and I knew. I saw all the places. The knee, the back, the head, I just knew." Before Minsu could answer, a chime sounded from his door. It was the station's communication system. A calm, automated voice spoke. "Student Kim Minsu, Student Lee G.A. You are requested to report to Station Administrator Rail's office immediately." They looked at each other. They knew this was coming. "Can you walk?" G.A. asked. "I can manage," Minsu said, pushing himself up. He was sore, but the initial shock was wearing off. Together they left the room and made their way to the Central Administration Tower. The stairs were even more intense now. Beings moved out of their way in the hallway. No one met their eyes. Administrator Rail was a being from a species known for their logic and order. They were tall, slender, and had long, expressive ears. His office was large, with a window that looked out at the stars. Professor Valerius was already there, his feathers still slightly ruffled. And standing near the wall were two Cathar. They were not students. They were adults, their armor scarred and worn. Their eyes were fixed on GA the moment she entered. The air in the room was cold and heavy. Administrator Rail stood behind his desk. "Please sit down," he said, his voice calm but firm. GA and Minsu sat in 2 chairs facing the desk. "Professor Valerius has given me a report of the incident," Rail began. "The details are concerning. Student Kale is in the medical bay. He has a broken wrist, a dislocated knee, severe nerve bruising, and a concussion. He will recover, but it will take time." One of the Cathar adults spoke, his voice a low, dangerous growl. This was not a fight. This was an unprovoked, brutal attack on a fellow student. "The human female is a danger." "It was provoked," Minsu said, his voice rising. "He hit me first. He threw me across the room. He was going to hit GA. Professor Valerius cleared his throat. "It is true that student Kale initiated the physical conflict by striking student Minsu. However," he looked at GA, his large eyes wide. "The response was disproportionate. It was of a nature we do not see in civilized society. It was savage." Administrator Rail turned his gaze to GA. She had been silent, her hands folded in her lap. "Student GA," he said, "what do you have to say for yourself?" GA looked up. She did not look at the Cathar. She looked directly at Administrator Rail. "He asked a question in class," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "He asked why we study humans. He said we were weak. He said we had no adaptations." She paused, letting her words hang in the air. Professor Valerius agreed with him. He said our path was ingenuity and cooperation. He made it sound like we are smart animals who work together because we are scared. She turned her head slowly and looked at Professor Valerius. "You were wrong." Professor Valerius seemed to shrink under her gaze. "Humanity's oldest adaptation is not cooperation," GA continued, turning back to Rail. "It is predation, but not like the Cathar. We did not evolve to be the biggest or the strongest. The animals we hunted were bigger and stronger than us. We evolved to be the most efficient." She unclasped her hands and held them up. "These are our adaptations, this body. Our brains learned to use it as a weapon. We learned where to hit to break a bone, where to press to stop a heart. We learned to turn an opponent's strength against them. We buried this knowledge because we did not need it anymore. But we never lost it." The Cathar by the wall took a step forward. "You admit you used this forbidden knowledge to maim my son." GA looked at the Cathar for the first time. Her expression was not angry. It was patient, like a teacher with a slow student. "Your son thought we were prey," she said. "He was wrong. He threw the first blow. I just gave him the answer to his question. I showed him the adaptation he said we did not have." She stood up. She was so much smaller than everyone in the room, but in that moment she seemed to fill the space. "You call it savage," she said, looking at Professor Valerius. "You call it disproportionate." She then looked at the Cathar. "You call it a brutal attack." Finally, she looked at Administrator Rail. "We call it a warning. For thousands of years, the smartest humans were not the ones who could fight the longest. They were the ones who could end the fight the fastest, who could make sure the other person would never be a threat again. That is what I did. I ended the fight." The room was silent. The truth of her words settled over them. It was a cold, hard truth. Administrator Rail studied her for a long time. "What you have shown us today, student GA, changes things. It changes how we see your species." GA nodded slowly. "I know." She looked at Minsu. "We should go. You need to see a doctor." Administrator Rail did not stop them. As they walked out of the office, no one spoke. The 2 Cathar watched them go, but they did not try to interfere. Out in the hallway, Minsu let out a long breath. "They're scared," he said. "Good," GA replied, her voice soft. "They should be. Maybe now they will leave us alone." They walked down the corridor, 2 humans in a galaxy that had just learned a very old, very terrifying secret. The story of the quiet girl and the bloody floor was just beginning to spread. And for the first time in a long time, the word human was being spoken not with pity, but with a new, respectful fear. The medical bay was a place of soft lights and quiet hums. A doctor, a being with many gentle tentacles, scanned Minsu's chest. The doctor made a soft clicking sound. "You have 2 cracked ribs," it said, "and significant bruising. You are lucky it was not worse. The force was considerable." Minsu winced as a cold gel was spread over his ribs. "It didn't feel lucky," he muttered. GI sat on a nearby stool waiting. She was calm. The storm inside her had passed. She watched the other patients and medics. She noticed how they looked at her. They would glance, then quickly look away. The news had reached here too. When Min-Soo was patched up and given medicine for the pain, they left the medical bay. The walk to the human dormitories felt longer than before. The station itself seemed different. The colors were the same. The sounds were the same. But the feeling in the air had changed. As they turned a corner into the main concourse, they stopped. A crowd was gathered in the open area. It was not an angry mob. It was a silent, watchful gathering. There were many species, but most were not the large warrior types like the Cathar. They were the smaller ones, the ones who were often overlooked. The ones who, like the humans, were sometimes pushed around by the stronger, more aggressive species. A small furry creature with large eyes stepped forward. Its name was Plink. He was from a species called the Vespin. They were known as great engineers, but they were physically very weak. Plink looked up at G.A. His whiskers twitched. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice a high, soft whisper. "What they are saying? That you defeated a Cathar warrior? By yourself?" G.A. looked at the small, hopeful faces in the crowd. She saw no fear in their eyes. She saw curiosity. She saw a flicker of something that had been missing before. Hope. "Yes," G.A. said simply. "How?" another voice asked. It was a slender, plant-like being. Min-Soo answered, his voice stronger now. "He attacked me first. He was going to hurt G.A. She defended us." "But how did you win?" Plink pressed, his big eyes wide. "They are so strong." G.A. looked at her hands. She then looked back at the crowd. She chose her words carefully. She did not want to teach them how to fight. She wanted to teach them how to think. "They are strong," she agreed. "But strength is only one tool. The Cathar see a problem and they use strength to solve it. It is the only tool they know how to use." She pointed to a maintenance panel on the wall. "Plink, if that panel is broken, you do not hit it. You use your knowledge. You use the right tool. You are small, but you can fix things the Cathar could never understand." She looked around at all of them. "My people, a long time ago, learned that the body is like that panel. It has weak points. It has places where a small, precise action can have a big effect. We learned to use the right tool for the job. We did not meet his strength with our strength. We met his strength with our knowledge." A murmur went through the crowd. It was a new idea for them. They had always been told that size and power were everything. This was different, so, "You are saying we are not weak?" a small voice asked. "I am saying you are not strong in the way they are strong," G.A. said. "But that does not make you weak. It makes you different, and different can be dangerous if you are smart." Meanwhile, in a different part of the station, the Cathar were having a meeting of their own. Kale's father, Gore, stood in a training room with other Cathar adults. Their faces were hard. "This is an insult," one of them roared, slamming a fist into a training dummy. The dummy shattered. "A human child. She has made us a laughingstock." Gore watched the dummy break. He was thinking. He was angrier than any of them, but he was also a strategist. "Silence," he commanded. The room went quiet. "My son was defeated. This is a fact. We can roar and break things, but that will not change the fact." He walked to the center of the room. "We believed our strength was unbeatable. We were wrong. The humans showed us a different kind of strength. A clever, sneaky strength. It was a dishonorable trick." "Another Cathar spat, was it?" Gore asked, his voice low. She stood her ground. She did not run. She did not use a hidden weapon. She used her own body. She saw a weakness and she attacked it. "Is that not what a predator does?" The other Cathar looked down, confused. Their entire culture was based on honor through direct force. This new idea was difficult to accept. "We have two choices," Gore said. "We can see this as an insult and declare war on the humans. But they are numerous. And if they all have this knowledge, it would be a bloody war." He paused, letting the idea sink in. "Or," he continued, "we can see this as a lesson. We have relied on our plates and our muscles for too long. We have forgotten that a true warrior must also use his mind. We must learn. We must adapt." Back in the concourse, the crowd around G.A. and Min-Soo was growing. More students had come to hear the human who had beaten a Cathar. They were asking questions. They were listening. A tall, bird-like student similar to Professor Valerius spoke up. "Your actions were violent. They were not peaceful. Is this the true nature of humanity? Have you been hiding it?" G.I. looked at the student. We are both, she said. We are the doctors who heal and the warriors who fight. We are the farmers who grow food and the hunters who kill. We contain both things. We choose which one to use. She looked around at the diverse crowd. Maybe all of you do too. You just forgot. Or you were never allowed to remember. She took a deep breath. We are not asking you to fight. We are asking you to stop thinking of yourselves as weak. That is the first step. The most important step. Just then, Administrator Rail and Professor Valerius appeared at the edge of the crowd. They had heard the commotion. They watched as GA spoke to the gathered students. They saw the way the others looked at her, not with fear of her, but with a new respect for her kind. Professor Valerius turned to Administrator Rail. I was wrong, the professor said quietly. I studied their technology. I studied their society, but I never studied their history. I never looked back far enough. Administrator Rail nodded slowly. It seems we have all been wrong. He watched GA, a small, calm figure in the middle of the crowd. We thought they were children in the galaxy. We were wrong. They are the old ones. They are the ones who remember what it takes to survive in a dark and dangerous universe. And they have just reminded us. He turned to leave. Do not interrupt them, Professor. Let them talk. The galaxy is listening now, and it is time we all learned a new lesson. A week passed. The station did not return to the way it was before. A new quiet had settled over the halls, but it was not a peaceful quiet. It was the quiet of people thinking, of reevaluating everything they thought they knew. GA and Minsu went back to their classes. Minsu's ribs were wrapped and he moved carefully. GA was the same quiet student as before, but no one saw her as weak anymore. When she walked into a room, conversations did not stop out of mockery, but out of a new, wary respect. The other students would make space for her. No one tried to block her path. The day of their next xenobiology class arrived. The air in the hallway outside the lab was tense. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen. Would GA and the Cathar be in the same room again? Would there be more violence? GA walked calmly to the door. Minsu walked beside her, a little slower than usual. They entered the lab. The room was full. Every student was in their seat early. The Cathar were there, sitting together on one side. Kale was not with them. He was still in the medical bay. The other Cathar did not look at GA with anger. They watched her, their postures stiff, their faces unreadable. Professor Valerius stood at the front of the room. He looked nervous. His feathers were flat against his head. He cleared his throat as GA and Minsu took their seats. Good morning, class, he began, his voice less chirpy than usual. Today, we will be beginning a new unit. The main hologram flickered to life. But it did not show a giant alien predator. It showed a human skeleton. It was a simple, familiar image to GA and Minsu, but to the rest of the class it was an object of sudden, intense interest. We will be studying, Professor Valerius said, the species known as Homo sapiens, humans. A soft murmur went through the room. The professor held up a hand for silence. Our previous understanding was incomplete. He glanced at GA. She was watching him, her expression calm. We focused on their recent achievements in technology and society. We failed to look at the evolutionary path that led them there. The hologram zoomed in on the human hand. Observe, the professor said, his voice growing stronger. The human hand. It lacks claws. It lacks natural armor. Its strength is modest, but notice the opposable thumb. This allows for a precision grip, for the creation and use of complex tools. The hologram changed to show a human shoulder joint. Now, observe the shoulder. This is a throwing joint. It is uniquely adapted for launching projectiles with great speed and accuracy. Early humans did not just fight with teeth and nails. They threw rocks. They threw spears. They could injure or kill from a distance, something few other species can do naturally. He looked around the room. The students were listening, captivated. Their endurance is another key. While many predators are built for short, explosive bursts of speed, humans are persistence hunters. They can run for miles tracking their prey until the larger, faster animal simply collapses from exhaustion. They outlast their problems. The professor paused. The hologram now showed a human brain, but their greatest adaptation is this, the human brain. Specifically, a part of it we had not considered in a predatory context. It is a powerful processor for pattern recognition and spatial awareness. It can, in a moment of threat, calculate the most efficient way to neutralize a target. It can turn the entire body into a system of levers and impacts. It does not meet force with force. It meets force with physics. He turned and faced GA directly. The whole class turned to look at her. "Student GA," the professor said. "You were correct. My lesson was wrong." "I apologize." GA gave a small, slow nod. She accepted the apology without a word. The professor turned back to the class. "The lesson we must all learn from humanity is not that they are secretly violent. The lesson is that their capacity for creation and their capacity for destruction come from the same source, their intelligence. They can build a starship or dismantle an opponent with the same mind. It is a sobering thought. It is a thought that should command respect." After the class ended, the students filed out quietly. GA and Minsu were among the last to leave. As they stepped into the hallway, they found a large figure waiting for them. It was Gore, Kale's father. Minsu instinctively stepped in front of GA, but she gently put a hand on his arm and moved him aside. She looked up at the massive Cathar warrior. Gore looked down at her. His face was hard, but his eyes were not full of hate. They were full of a grim, newfound understanding. "My son will recover," Gore said, his voice a low rumble. "His body, at least. His pride. That will take longer." GI said nothing. She just waited. "I have spoken to him," Gore continued. "I have made him watch the security recording of your encounter. He saw it many times. He saw his own mistakes. He saw your precision." He paused. It was a painful lesson, but a necessary one. He looked at GA, really looked at her, not as a weakling, but as a fellow warrior of a different kind. "Our species have much to learn from each other," Gore said. "We have strength you lack. You have a way of thinking we lack. Perhaps there is a path forward that is not war." GA considered this. "There does not have to be a war if there is respect," she said. Gore gave a single, slow nod. It was a huge concession. "There is respect," he said. Then he turned and walked away, his heavy footsteps echoing in the hall. Minsu let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "I thought he was going to challenge you right there." "He's smarter than his son," GA said softly. "He understands that some fights you cannot win with punches." They walked back towards their dormitory. The station felt different again. The tension was beginning to fade, replaced by a fragile new normal. When they reached the common area for human students, a few others were there. They looked at GA. One of them, a boy named June, smiled nervously. "Hey GA, we heard about what you did. Everyone is talking about it." Another girl, Sumin, nodded. "They're not making fun of us anymore. They're actually listening when we talk in engineering class." GA looked at their faces. They were not looking at her like she was a monster. They were looking at her with a kind of relieved pride. She had not just fought for herself and Minsu. She had fought for all of them. She had reminded the galaxy that humanity was not to be underestimated. She had thrown a stone into the pond of the galaxy, and the ripples were still spreading. The story of the quiet girl and the bloody floor was not a story of a fight. It was a story of a first contact that should have happened long ago. It was the moment the galaxy finally met the real human race. Not the peaceful explorers they pretended to be, but the smart, tough, and dangerous survivors they had always been. And from that day on, the words "humanity, fuck yeah" were not just a saying. They were a simple statement of fact.